All right, AP World History. We are going to journey a little further into the beast here. All right, we got ourselves through World War One in class, and this is going to be a run at some of those interwar years. So basically, about 1920 up to about 19. I guess about 37, 38, 39, kind of point in time when World War II was starting to break out in Asia and in Europe. But this is going to be everything in between, okay? And so section 4 is going to start us off with learning a little bit about economics and the role that it played in the interwar period. It's actually a fairly significant role, and it's going to be one of the other leading causes of World War II. We already covered one of them. That was the position Germany found itself at the end of World War One, and that desire to to get revenge from the treatment the Germans had received from the British and the French in particular. But anyhow, economics are going to play an important role as well. All right, and the key. I guess theme here is that we're going to see a bunch of just rough times when it comes to economics. And this is going to be, it seems to be regardless of whether countries were on the winning side of World War One or on the losing side. The losers might get it, kind of up front, but by the time we get into the 30s, almost everyone is feeling some significant economic crisis going on in their countries, and the consequences will be far ranging. All right, we'll start you off with the fact that coming out of World War One, many countries. I mean, obviously, countries who have lost the war typically are going to end that war with debt. Germany, especially, because now they have reparations that they have to pay. But even a lot of the Allied nations had gone deeply into debt to finance the war. The British and French. I mean, part of where they want those reparations from Germany is to try to repair their own economies. They've been hit pretty hard, but no one hit as hard as Germany. When we go back and we're talking about just that, again, 270 billion Deutschmarks is the payment there. I think 30 billion in U.S. dollars if we're converting that over. But they are going to be dealing with the most significant issues coming out of World War One with that crippling debt. They have no way of paying it. In the last years of the war, Germany's economy began to falter significantly, and so they find themselves in a really, really difficult spot. The new government of Germany that is created in the wake of World War One. It's called the Weimar Republic. You'll bump into that in some of our other sources in AMSCO and things like that. But the Weimar Republic, a government that's trying to experiment with democracy, free elections and representation and that sort of thing. But one of the early black eyes that the Weimar Republic is going to take, especially in the view of the German people, is their decision to try to deal with their financial problems by printing currency. This is something that governments do sometimes. They print currency, they print money that they don't really have anything to back up. Even the cash that we have here in the United States is backed by gold, and that's guaranteed by the U.S. government. There's something of value. The value isn't in the $5 bill. The value isn't our debit card. It's what it represents. And and sometimes when you have governments that are in a difficult situation like Germany finds itself in, they try to, like I've got there, try to stabilize things by just printing more currency and hoping that can kind of fix the problem. The issue with that is that it's not going to take long for people to realize that the government really doesn't have money. They're just printing money, but there's nothing of value behind it. And in the end, what it does is that it reduces the value of the currency. Pretty soon that money doesn't have the same value that it had the day before, the week before. And what the Weimar Republic's attempt to try to solve their financial problems by just, you know, just churning up the printing presses and producing more paper currency is it creates a situation. If I can get my, here we go, come on, there we are. Just trying to get this to a PowerPoint to cooperate with me, results in a situation in the early 1920s that we call hyperinflation. And the bottom line is the German currency becomes worthless. Okay, the pictures I have kind of on both sides of these. You've got these two kids over here. These are bundles of Deutschmarks. Okay, this what looks like these building blocks or something here, and this kid is holding one U.S. American dollar, and basically this $1 has the same value as all these bundled up German bills, all these Deutschmarks. All right. Yeah, I mean, just crazy. This lady here has decided that, hey, I'll make a fashion statement with my worthless German money. And she's sewn it together to make a dress. These kids really are taking it to the whole concept of building blocks. You might as well have some fun with it. I mean, it's worth nothing else. So, I mean, the Germans try to have a sense of humor about it. But the reality is, I mean, it's a disaster, and everyone knows it. The Germans aren't fooling anyone by trying to print up all this extra cash that they have nothing of value to back it up with, and it just leaves the German people and the German state in just a financial disaster in the early years of the war, or excuse me, after the war. And I think we'll get in here a little bit. I think we'll jump in, or maybe not. Maybe I should just give you that whole story right now. I'll give you the short version. The United States will come to the rescue for Germany. When they can't pay off their bills, the British and French start talking about taking more German land, and it's the United States that ends up giving a loan to Germany. So that Germany can then pay off some of its loans to British and the British and the French. And then once they paid off those loans to the British and the French, they're able to pay off some of their loans to the United States. It's kind of a wonderful wheel of money, but it kind of gets things moving again and will slowly pull Germany out of that hyperinflation by about the mid 1920s. By about 1925, Germany will be basically kind of on the mend and looking like they're, heading for kind of better days. All right. So that's kind of how that hyperinflation situation comes to an end. I thought maybe I covered it in the notes, but apparently not. All right. The Soviet Union, formerly Russia, also ends World War I with a ton of debt. Their country, too, had all kinds of financial problems under the Tsar. But the Tsar is gone now. Matter of fact, the Tsar and his family have been shot by the Tsar, or by the Bolsheviks, and so they're gone. And the position of the new communist government in the Soviet Union, in the USSR, the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, is that we didn't accrue that debt. That was the other government. That was Russia. We're not Russia anymore, so we don't owe anyone anything. And they pretty much shut it down. It's like, we're not paying any debts. The people who pretty much piled up all that debt, they're all pretty much dead and gone. And so you're dealing with us, and we're not dealing with the debt. Okay, there's a simple way of dealing with that kind of an issue. So anyhow, we'll kind of trundle our way through the 1920s. Most countries will see by the time you get to the later part of the 1920s, 26, 27, 28, that things are actually starting to improve. Over here in America, we go through what's called the Jazz Age, and this short, brief period of time of all this consumerism. You have European countries, including Germany, that seem like they're starting to turn a corner. Economically, financially, and it looks like better times have arrived, and that sort of thing. And that party lasts until almost the end of 1929, when our stock market crashes. There is a lot that you probably, you get into taking a whole college class on the Great Depression and spend most of it talking about what caused it. It's complex. A lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of Americans, especially, were living on credit. Credit was becoming was kind of this new thing, especially with middle class. And people buying all kinds of consumer goods on credit. There's a lot of agricultural overproduction going on around the world by the time we get to the late 20s. And supply and demand is starting to get out of whack. There's all kinds of things that all combine together and result in our stock market here in the United States, in effect, crashing. In other words, everyone tries to sell their stocks. A panic takes hold, and everyone all at once tries to sell their stocks, and that just further tumbles the value of the stocks and just propels the panic even further. And our financial marketplace here in the United States basically melts down over the space of a couple of weeks. Something that we've taken measures to try to make sure will never quite happen again the same way. And so far as held out, we've had some recessions, but we've never had anything like what starts in 1929, the Great Depression. And this is something that starts in the United States, but because of the United States financial value, globally speaking, it is going to trigger one country after another, after another, after another. They all have their own role to play in all this. It's not like I'm saying, the United States causes the Great Depression. Obviously, if other countries' economies had been stronger, they would have been able to withhold it. But that doesn't work out that way. And this Great Depression will become more or less a global event. Okay. And the Great Depression is kind of the outward signs of it is what I have there for number 2. You see hundreds of banks here in the United States and then in other countries that the banks fail. They go out of business. And people who have their life savings in those banks, poof, it's gone. Their money is gone. There's no way they can get it back. Nowadays, the government guarantees, insures that money that you have deposited in a bank or a credit union. Back then, no, nothing. It's just gone. It's just gone. And then also massive unemployment. We get excited nowadays when our employment rate in the United States exceeds 4 or 5%. We start looking, what's going on? We hit 25% during the Great Depression. Okay, so basically the 1 out of every 4 people looking for work, not able to find it. And then you see that same pattern happen in all the other countries. Pretty much all your major European countries, some of the countries in Asia. I mean, these are the kind of the same factors that come into play: is business failures, bank failures, massive unemployment, those kinds of things. Okay, obviously for European countries, their colonies, part of their, what's left of their empires after World War One, they struggle mightily because all of a sudden, the mother country, the colonizers themselves are barely able to keep their head above water, and so it just kind of tumbles downhill from there. And it's going to be really, really tough days, and it's going to add even more ammunition into the bag of these countries that are trying to free themselves. They've already watched this world war that to them kind of proved that, these European countries were not perfect. They're fallible. They make horrible mistakes and then they end up slaughtering each other in huge numbers. Now, all these economic problems, and it's all adding up to the colonized people in these empires that these guys that are running the show, they try to fool us into thinking they've got the answers to everything. They don't. All right. And so anyhow, tough times for them. All right. Coming to the rescue of the Great Depression will be something that you'll maybe someday in an economics course, or maybe you'll get some of this in U.S. history, but you'll learn a little bit more about Maynard Keynes, who was an economist, and his solution, which the United States will embrace, is to basically abandon laissez-faire economics. Okay, government hands off. Just let the markets do their thing. Keynes says that part of the reason the Great Depression happened was because government wasn't paying any attention to what was going on in businesses, and a lot of businesses were practicing really high risk kinds of strategies that they were undertaking, and it all falls in. Boom, Great Depression. So what he's arguing for is that the government needs to take more control over the economy. He's not. We're stepping away from it. We're not going to use that mercantilism word here. Matter of fact, we're going to use the word Keynesian economics instead, because that's not 100% what he's aiming towards. He's just saying that government needs to borrow money. In other words, in order to put people to work, basically make jobs where jobs don't exist, to get bring the unemployment rate down. That your government needs to take direct action, and they need to borrow money, and they need to spend it as soon as they borrow it to try to get the economy up and running. And then Keynesian says once that economy begins to show signs of life, then the government can deal with paying off the debts that they've collected during that period of injecting money into the system. Now, where are they going to get that money? They're pretty much going to have to borrow it from major corporations that have money that they can loan. And the government's pretty much saying, hey, if we get everything working again, it's going to help your businesses. Your customers going to be able to spend money again. I mean, it's in your best interest to help the government. And so that's where a lot of those loans will end up coming from. It's going to be from big corporations, big businesses who see that they have a vested interest in getting the governments, of a lot of these various countries, including the United States, to get things up and running again. Okay. What else do we got here? Well, I guess some of that is what I've been talking about. Sorry, here again where I sometimes get ahead of myself. That deficit spending is the idea of a government borrowing money, going into debt, all right, but using that money then to re-inject into the economy. And during the Great Depression, that is exactly here. This time I won't get ahead of myself. Exactly what will happen in 1932. Franklin Roosevelt will be elected and will serve the first of what will end up being 4 terms. We got a whole amendment to the Constitution because of Roosevelt that put it back down to 2 terms, but that didn't exist when he became president. Anyhow, he is the one who is pretty much undertakes the task of trying to tackle the Great Depression. He creates in his new administration what he calls the New Deal, which is going to put a lot of these Keynesian economic theories into practice. And so what that will involve, and by the way, you'll get into a lot more detail about this when you take your U.S. history, okay? But the New Deal is going to revolve around these 3 themes of relief, recovery, reform. So relief, in other words, we need to bring direct relief to the American people immediately, and create jobs and, get people back to work and making money and help people who've lost their homes and, that sort of thing. And then recovery is pretty much the whole process of making sure that everyone's being included in this. It's as inclusive as you can make it. And then reform is making changes to make sure that this never happens again, kind of an idea. Okay, that is kind of the 3 driving forces of the New Deal. Before I jump into Japan and all that, this is going, it's going to be a long haul. The New Deal is going to be, it's not like a silver bullet. It's not like it works immediately. It takes through most of the 1930s and very, very slow progress in defeating the Great Depression here in the United States and in other countries as well. Most countries are starting to see glimmers of hope by the end of the 1930s. Some historians claim that really what truly ended the Great Depression was World War II. And that, this massive war breaking out suddenly re-geared all these industries into, wartime production. A lot of unemployed guys suddenly can join the military, and historians argue back and forth. There are some who say that no, you didn't need World War II. Keynesian economics were going to, eventually we're going to fix the problem, that already were fixing the problem, that kind of thing. I don't know, one of those that goes round and round and round. All right. Let's flip it over here and take a look at Japan. They also are hit hard by the Depression, and they make the decision to actually intentionally devalue their currency and then really kind of go lean in heavy on exports, and at the same time looking towards trying to build that little empire, that whole colonization society, seeing what they can do as far as adding territories to Japan's little empire, and see what that can do to help them to combat the effects of the Depression as well. So they take a slightly different approach than the United States, but one that starts to make some gains for them as well. Right? In Russia, um, kind of a different story going on in Russia. First of all, before we talk about them during the Great Depression, we're going to get a whole lot of information tumbling here at you. Matter of fact, this is probably going to take the bulk of what else we're going to be covering in these video notes. So, we talked about Russia exiting out of World War I in 1917 after they've had these revolutions, one that removes Tsar Nicholas II, and then a second revolution that brings these Bolsheviks, these communists, into power, led by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin and others. And what is going to take place afterwards is going to be a ugly civil war that is going to be fought in Russia, and it's going to be a war where you're going to have I don't know, it's kind of cute in some regards in that you'll see references to it as the Reds versus the Whites. Kind of like, well, hey, let's pick colors. Well, the Reds are going to be the communists, okay, because that's always kind of their color, the banner of revolution, red. They're going to be fighting against a whole array of enemies, including a small contingent of troops coming from Britain and the United States who will be fighting against the Bolsheviks. We don't like the idea of this communism stuff possibly taking hold in Russia. And we're also still a little bit miffed that Russia pulled themselves out of the war. And so we end up actually sending a small number of troops to Russia briefly to fight against these Bolsheviks. And then we kind of realize they're probably going to win, and we get our troops out of there. That's something the communists will not forget. That we and the Brits were trying to snuff them out when they were, just trying to get started. Memory's going to run long on some of this stuff. But the Civil War fails for those opposed to the Bolsheviks because they have so many different war aims. Some of them just hate communism. Some of them want a democratic style government instead of communism. Some of them want to bring the monarchy back. Bottom line, the quote unquote whites, those fighting against the Bolsheviks, are not on the same page. They've got all kinds of different goals, and the Reds are pretty much of all of one vision. They want to bring communism to Russia, and that is going to help them by 1921 to win the Civil War. Okay, the Bolsheviks. They win, but by the time the war is over, the country is just absolutely wrecked. There is famine breaking out in various parts of Russia. The economy is it's gone. I mean, it's right there on the verge of just absolute and complete and total collapse. So, Lenin and the communists, they've won a country, but what kind of a country they've won is a totally different story. Population that's just, in tatters, an economy that's worse than tatters. And so they've got a big job ahead of them. To try to pull this all out of the fire. Okay, Lenin will declare what he calls his new economic policy in 1921, and this is what he's going to do to basically try to kickstart the economy of Russia, and I should say Russia, beginning to morph now into Soviet Union. I got to get that Russia out of my brain for a while. They're going to be the Soviet Union for about the next 70 years. It's interesting, the new economic policy, what it is at core is capitalism. Whoops. Yeah, that's supposed to be. And this is Lenin being pragmatic, pretty much saying, we'll get to the communism, but the country's kind of a mess right now, and we got to do something to get the economy rolling. And so we're going to allow people a limited amount of private business ownership. And once things are up and running, then we're going to kind of let the government take those things over, and then we're going to get ourselves back on track and head towards Marx's communist wonderland. But it's interesting that one of the first big moves that the communists have to make is to say, "Hey, Russians, go ahead and start your own businesses, okay? Because that's communism or not." Anyhow, it works. Okay, the new economic policy works. It starts digging the Soviet Union out of these economic problems, and so there you go. I'll just leave it at that. By the time you are getting into 21, 22, Lenin is also beginning to struggle personally with a losing battle with cancer. And so this guy that kind of brings communism in and is kind of the inspiration and the the power, the force behind the Russian Revolution, doesn't live much longer after he and the Bolsheviks succeed. He dies. There is a brief power struggle. Lenin had made it fairly clear who he wanted to take his place, but that gentleman gets elbowed out of the way by good old Uncle Joe, Joseph Stalin, that you see pictured there. Stalin is a guy who has been with Lenin from pretty much the beginning. He has played all kinds of roles for Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Often, most of those roles being a little bit more on the bloody side. He's kind of the guy that you would maybe pick up the phone when you had some dirty business that needed to be taken care of. Joe was the guy to call. It's like, I got a problem, and he'd be the one to pretty much say, Mr. Lenin, don't worry about it. It's taken care of already. He is able to maneuver his way into positioning himself by taking control of what's called the Politburo. The Politburo is the top leadership group within the Communist Party that is now controlling the Soviet Union. And by 1924, he has established himself as basically an authoritarian leader. His interpretation of communism is going to be that it's going to require a period of basically of a dictatorship, to have this strongman leader to establish order in the country, to set up the basic functioning of communism, and then according to the grand plan, eventually that dictator will be able to step aside, and communism will do its magic. The reality is that Stalin is not going to give up his power until the day he drops dead. And this is a pattern that we see happen over and over again. We see it, in Russia. We'll see it in China, where we have these leaders who are trying to bring communism to these countries, who will make this claim that we need this period of dictatorship to establish the precepts of communism, and then it will go away, and it never goes away. It gets stuck at the dictatorship, basically, the authoritarian ruler spot. And that's kind of where, I don't know, no one has been able to pull off communism yet, the way that Karl Marx described it. A couple of countries, I guess Cuba, maybe Vietnam, have come quasi-close-ish. Anyhow, we got Stalin now in power in the Soviet Union, all right? Stalin will... I don't know, shades of, Peter the Great and, some of the others. He definitely sees his role as one that needs to push this now, communist Soviet Union in further into the 20th century. There's no getting around it that the Soviet Union is behind the rest of Europe. Back under the czars, they had been very, very slow to industrialize, and it was showing. And so to try to catch up with Europe and the rest of the West, United States, all of that, Stalin declares what he calls his 5-year plan. And I could call it 5-year plans. I could make that plural because he creates series of these. And what it's going to be is basically his approach to trying to to make the Soviet economy more communist. He dumps the new economic policy that Lenin had set up. He said, that's done, that's gone. You're not running your own businesses anymore. It was never communism to start with. Get rid of it. We're going to run with the 5-year plans, and that is what we're going to do to modernize our country. And to a certain extent, some of these 5-year plans will be fairly effective. I mean, the Soviets will industrialize very quickly. And maybe not at the same level as the United States and some of our friends over there in Western Europe, but still they're going to make some really, really major gains in terms of trying to close the gap between the Soviet Union and the West. And so I'm not going to say that the 5-year plans are a stunning success, but they definitely aren't any kind of a smoking heaping disaster either. They do produce results. Okay, and other aspects of how Stalin is running the country, it's rough. Going back to Russia days, I mean, this is a country that is very, very traditionally agricultural. Farming is what is at its core. And this is interesting because Marx had written the Communist Manifesto as a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. His vision was that the factory workers were going to rise up and overthrow the owners and throw the proletariat, overthrowing the bourgeoisie. But he saw them as the factory workers. And now the experiment we have rolling out in the Soviet Union is it's farmers. It's not factory workers. It's farmers that are the ones that are kind of now powering the revolution. But they're going to get their first big dose of communism out there in the farmland. Collectivization, that word you see there with B, is Stalin's takeover of agriculture, the agricultural business of the Soviet Union. He takes land from landowners. It says no one is going to own land anymore. It's not communist, for you to have your own land. The land will belong to the state, and the food that is grown on it will be distributed to everyone in the cities, in the countryside, that sort of thing. It's going to lead to a lot of resistance by a lot of farmers. Some of them will kill their crops, destroy their fields, burn them. Others will kill their livestock rather than hand it over to the government. A lot of these are farmlands that have been in families for generations, and now this guy shows up and says it's not your land anymore, and you're getting nothing. You're not being compensated for it. It's gone. It's now part of a farming collective, and you're now going to continue farming, but you're going to personally profit in no way, shape, or form from it. Everything you're raising, is going to be put on a train or a truck or something and taken somewhere else. You'll be left with a little bit. The resistance to collectivization triggers a series of famines. Part of the Soviet Union where this hits the hardest is Ukraine. Ukraine was known as the breadbasket of the region, and it is there that there's going to be the stiffest resistance. And some of that is going to be that even way back then, there are people who see themselves as Ukrainians as being like separate from the Russians. When you look at the conflict that's going on right now between Ukraine and Russia, don't fool yourself into thinking that some of the roots of it go back to all of this. And what families remember in Ukraine when the Russians came in and enforced collectivization, and then what that triggered, all the death and suffering that it triggered, and they figure somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere 15 to 20 million end up dying to these famines. This is a huge deal. While Stalin enforces collectivization. He refuses to budge on this. This is what we're doing. This is the way it is. All right. Okay, we're going to finish off with Russia here, and then we'll be finished off with these notes. Excuse me, the Soviet Union. All right. And here, I guess this will definitely be one of the things that's going to cement Stalin's position as the leader of the Soviet Union. And that is that because the Soviet Union had already basically withdrawn itself from the rest of the global economy after the revolution took place, This is the one country that's kind of the exception to the rule when it comes to the Great Depression. The Great Depression really doesn't land in the Soviet Union because they really don't have much participation with the global economy that's already out there. And so, yeah, they don't see the bank failures. They really don't operate that same way. They don't see all the business failures because I mean, officially at least, reject capitalism and private ownership of businesses and that sort of thing. And so while the West is suffering through the Great Depression, um, the Soviet Union's industrializing. They're applying these 5-year plans, and Stalin, is turning and telling his people, there you go, they're capitalists, and look at them. Their world is, I mean, it's a disaster, and look at us. We're going in the opposite direction, and to a lot of the Soviet people, it's kind of like, huh, okay, maybe these guys are onto something, and like I said, goes a long way in cementing Stalin's position as the leader in the Soviet Union. Okay, a little bit here about Stalin and his dictatorship. Um, and it truly, I mean, when we talk about authoritarian dictatorship, what Joseph Stalin eventually creates meets it, I mean, lock, stock, and barrel. He allows zero dissent, okay? Anyone that wants to criticize him, criticize his Soviet government, they are going to be dealt with, and dealt with swiftly. Most of them sent off. They develop what they call a gulag system. You can see that word right there. Gulag. The gulags are basically like prison camps, work camps, labor camps, and the Soviets set up a whole range of these throughout the country, especially way out in Siberia, kind of out in the frontier. And people who try to oppose him, people who try to speak out against communism and and the Soviet government of the country, that's where they end up. Right. A lot of psychologists believe that Stalin had a very, very almost kind of like a paranoid personality disorder, that he always sensed and felt like people were out to get him. One of the other outward signs of just that paranoia is that by the about the mid to late 1930s, he begins to suspect that a lot of his army officers, top leaders in the Soviet military, are plotting against him. He thinks there's all kinds of disloyalty, and that a lot of these generals and other officers are secretly plotting to overthrow him. And so he purges the Soviet military. Anyone that he suspects is not a 1,000,000% loyal to him, he has them killed. I mean, just bullet to the back of the head. And thousands and thousands of his best trained, experienced officers are going to be killed in this manner, to feed his paranoia. It's something that follows him all the way to the end of his life. And I mean, he has one of his wives ends up committing suicide over just the way he is just as far as a just a deeply flawed human being. And it shows the way that he runs the country. Again, allowing no dissent, no opposition, demanding full loyalty, no matter what from his people. But that purge will come back to haunt him a few years later, when Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany launches an invasion of the Soviet Union. Stalin is going to come very, very close to losing everything, losing his country, probably losing his life, because his military can't withstand the attack from the Germans, because he himself is responsible for killing off the vast majority of his experienced military leadership. Um, yeah, it's going to take a few miracles and some other help for him to pull that one out of the fire. Anyhow, there we go. That'll take us through all of that. Next up will be a quick spin by Mexico, and then we start dealing with the rise of fascism in Europe, and that will get us just all the quicker and able to move on closer to the outbreak of World War II. We still got a long way to go, though, folks. Again, it's the beast, and yeah, it is what it is. So there you go. I'm coming up on 40 minutes. It's the longest video notes you've had all year. I know it, but it is what it is. Okay. Next time we're at this, we'll be at it in the classroom together. No, I can't wait. All right. Take care.